Bill C. asked me, Dan, who is the greatest American director? Orson Welles, John Cassavetes, Martin Scorsese, Stanley Kubrick, Woody Allen, or anyone else? I've read many of your reviews, and I still don't know who you think is the greatest American director. Well, this is something that's highly subjective. I have a great films list, but I don't list, who's the greatest, this, what. I don't put them in a 1 to 100 order. Taking those like top 5 guys, you'd say, is probably a good start. Some people might add in a Frank Capra a bit earlier. Some people even consider Charlie Chaplin or Alfred Hitchcock American directors. I don't think any of them, though, are of the quality of the ones you mentioned. Orson Welles certainly is the father of American cinema. Became the father of American independent cinema after he was blackballed by Hollywood. If you look at his Citizen Kane, it deserves all the plaudits it gets. I don't think it's the greatest film of all time. It probably won't even make my top 20 or 30, but it's certainly a great film, and it certainly innovated in its time. I've only seen the Baudelarized version of The Magnificent Ambersons. He did some interesting films. A Lady from Shanghai is a great film noir. The Third Man, I consider a Wells film, even though it's listed under Carol Reed, because it's so Wellesian, and even if Wells didn't film the bulk of it, without him there, that film would have been totally different. Mr. Arkadin is a great film, and there's a few other ones. The Trial is a great film. The film noir, Touch of Evil, is close to being great, probably near great. You could argue it's great, though. Falstaff, Chimes at Midnight, is a bizarre film, but it's great because it shows Wells takes a character, Falstaff, as a minor, silly character in 5 mediocre Shakespeare plays and makes a great film out of it. Orson Welles, is a greater artist than William Shakespeare. You heard that first, and that's for people centuries hence. And then his last great film was probably F for Fake. I'm probably going to interview, hopefully, Wells's daughter, Beatrice Wells, when the last film of Wells is introduced. So that's my opinion on Wells. In short, Wells did the most with the least. John Cassavetes certainly is the son of Wells in terms of independent filmmaking. I think one could make a great argument that The Killing of a Chinese Bookie is the greatest American film ever made. It's the best gangster film ever made. There's nothing, I don't think, even close to it. It is the Mount Everest of gangster films. He did a couple of other great films, too. Opening Night, Faces, and some of his other stuff like, A Woman Under the Influence, Husbands, have great moments in them. He got a little mawkish towards the end. Gloria was not a particularly good work. I didn't see his last film, Love Streams. But he's certainly up there. Martin Scorsese started out like gangbusters, Who's That Knocking on My Door and Boxcar Bertha both have moments. Mean Streets, it was his first great film. It's a classic. It's raw. It still works today. Taxi Driver is right up there with the portrait, with The Killing of a Chinese Bookie is possibly one of the greatest American films of all time. He did a musical, New York, which is okay. Then he did Raging Bull, which is considered the greatest film of the 80s. I don't think it is, but it's certainly a great film. He did another great film, The King of Comedy. He did a great comedy, which slips my mind, about a computer programmer getting lost in Manhattan. 1990, Goodfellas was his last absolutely great film. He had some interesting films in the 90s. In the O's, he's done some good work here and there, some, rather hit and miss kind of stuff. Some people might also argue Oliver Stone. Stone had 3 great films. His 60s trilogy, The Doors, JFK, and Nixon. But after that and before that, nothing great. So that takes care of Scorsese. Kubrick, of course, is probably the great rival to Wells in a sense. Paths of Glory, what can you say? Paths of Glory was his first inarguably great film. Dr. Strangelove has got to be in the top 20 of all-time great films, and certainly the greatest satire, one of the greatest comedies. 2001: A Space Odyssey, non-real science fiction film. There's 2001: A Space Odyssey in every other science fiction film. A Clockwork Orange, another great film. Barry Lyndon had some great moments. The Shining showed that you could take a shit book by Stephen King and make it into a great masterpiece. Full Metal Jacket has some great moments, and it's probably a near great film. His last film was the last great film, Eyes Wide Shut. I'm one of the few people who saw it as a masterpiece when it came out. So those are probably the two. Woody Allen arguably has more great films than either Kubrick or Welles because he made so many more. And his golden age films are the ones he made maybe two or three films that you can argue as great, and I would argue as great after the golden age of 77 to 92, such as Annie Hall, I say, is a near great film. Manhattan is a great film. Interiors is a near great to great film. Then the big three, Stardust Memories is Titanic film. It's so much better than 8.5 by Fellini. Then we get the other great films are Another Woman, which is Wild Strawberries done even better than Bergman did it, and then Crimes and Misdemeanors, which is better than Dostoevsky's Crime and Punishment. Radio Days is Allen's greatest comedy, and it's one of the great comedies of all time. And a handful of other films in the 80s, a few in the 90s that had moments. Allen was great, but he also had the most bad films, even more than Cassavetes, or at least bad in comparison, mediocre films. So I think it would have to come down to just the percentage of films, and it's Welles and Kubrick. And I'd have to give the slightest of edges to Welles simply because he never had the support that Kubrick did. Welles did more with less than any other director. So I would probably have to rank Welles as 1, Kubrick 1A, and then probably Scorsese and Cassavetes as 2 and 2A, and then probably Woody Allen as number 5. But that would be 3 and 3A for Cassavetes and Scorsese. But anyway, that's how I would probably rank them. So thanks for the question.